Okay, are we ready to get going?
We're ready.
Ready.
Aloha to all of those entering the meeting. We'll get started in just a moment. We have your mic muted, but we will be using the Q&A feature to take your questions for our guests. So get ready to jot down those as we move through the presentation, and make sure to include at least your first name and who you want to address the question to. Also, we'll be recording today's presentation not only for HY Media radio stations, but you'll also be able to access the recording through YouTube on MauiReefs.org. So let's go ahead and get started. Aloha, everyone. I'm Darla Palmer-Ellingson, and today we have another special joint collaboration with Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's Know Your Ocean virtual monthly speakers series and the public affairs show Island Environment 360, a full circle view of Hawaiian culture and environmental issues, brought to you from Maui as a community service of HY Media. So first off, I want to say a big mahalo to MNMRC for inviting me to host with you. MNMRC is a nonprofit organization working for healthy coral reefs, clean ocean water, abundant native fish for the islands of Maui Nui. And we have Ann and Meredith in the background here from MNMRC running the show for us. And also wanted to say mahalo to the County of Maui Office of Economic Development for supporting the Know Your Ocean speaker series. And today we're going to be talking about the social and psychological factors that influence human behavior in our nearshore environments, based on a recent joint study conducted in West Maui by Polanui Hiu, the Nature Conservancy, and Stanford University. And first you'll meet Ikolu Lindsay and Alana Yurkanin. Ikolu Lindsay is the co-founder of Polanui Hiu, the first community managed Makai area on Maui, and is the president of Maui Cultural Lands. Alana Yurkanin is the Maui Marine Project Manager at the Nature Conservancy and serves on the steering committee of Hui o Kawaiola, a unique community-based ocean water quality monitoring program on Maui. Alana grew up in Hawaii and works to protect the environment along and beyond the coast, as well as the people and culture so interestingly connected to our surroundings. And later, you're gonna meet Kika Santana. Francisca Kika Santana is a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Emmett Interdisciplinary program in Environment and Resources at Stanford University. She studies how individuals and groups respond to environmental change and climate risk, including what motivates coastal users to take pro-environmental action in Maui's declining coral reef environment. Kika has also worked on energy and marine policy issues in the nonprofit and government sectors. Well, welcome everyone. Ikola and Alana, I'm just going to turn it right over to you to start your part of the presentation.
Thank you, Darla. Aloha kako. Welcome to Give Me Slide Number 1. Back.
All right.
Slide number 2. Did we lose
Sorry,
slide?
I think it's missing. Sorry.
Technical difficulties, excuse us.
I think it's missing. I think we should just go for it.
Okay, well, I am just going to go from here. Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Napapalimo o Pi'ilani. Napapalimo o Pi'ilani is an important part of history. This area was reserved for ali'i. As such, the consequences of breaking any kapu were severe. This place, as it speaks to its name, Na'apapa, that reef, the limu, belongs to Pi'ilani, the chief of the time in 1500s. So it fed him and everybody else, okay? So it's abundant in fish and limu. Now, fast forward to where we are today. we're faced with many challenges. So our story really starts in about 2005 with a canoe ride with my son and my father. While I was towing them on the canoe, my father noticed, my son was 6 at the time, that there was definitely a lack of limu because he used to gather and eat. That was it. That's what they eat for most of the time when they couldn't find food elsewhere. They're eating limu, right? And also fish. So with the lack of abundance, that was the planting of the seed for where we are today. In 2010, Polanui was formed with me raising my hand in a meeting at Maui Nui Marine Resource Council saying, hey, I got someplace we can try and protect. I figure if I'm going to protect any place, it's going to be my backyard. So, you know, my family history here goes deep. My great-grandfather fished. My grandfather fished here. My whole family fed themselves from a sustainable perspective here, never eating the same fish consistently, always putting in, my grandmother anyway, always putting in for different types of fish as they fed themselves. Yeah. As a community member in this space, we're not quite prepared for the Western science perspective. So within the Polanui Hiu, by the way, Polanui is the name of the ahupo'a that we're in, and Hiu, H-I-U, is a call to action. So some of the problems we saw was the recreational use, but also a lot of problems on land as sugar went out, development came in, the terrestrial non-point source pollution was prevalent, people's habits were changing. So there are many different habits that have become destructive rather than productive because we're using the ocean for economic gain and for fun. We've changed our perspective from feeding our families to one of economic resources so I can go buy my fish at the store, right? And children, students nowadays are losing that taste for limu. So whether or not limu exists today is not important because we're not eating it as we once were. So I want to pass this over to Alana so she can bring up the next part. Go for it, Alana.
Thanks, Ekolu. Hi, everyone. So this segues perfectly into a partner study with the Nature Conservancy, Polanui Hiu, and the Department of Land and Natural Resources. And we all came together to conduct a human use and creel survey at Polanui at about a half-mile of the coastline there. And what a creel survey is we went out for over 100 days in 1 year and over 40 nights in 1 year and took snapshots, mental snapshots every 20 minutes of what type of activity was happening in this study area. So it could be swimming, snorkeling, surfing, fishing. We would record all of those types of activities. And in reflecting upon the data a year later, we found some pretty staggering statistics. The one that really stands out to me was how many times the reef was struck by these activities. And it was 906 times during the survey. So this is interesting because if you think of a large vessel, a boat that washes up onto the reef, that gets a lot of attention and there are often legal consequences and the person often gets fined. But if you think about just nicks and cuts here and there from people probably not even knowing they're doing it, that does accumulate to damage, but it's currently not really recognized as a major source of damage. So this study really brought that to my attention, our attention. And we started thinking, what can we do with this information? To dive a little bit deeper into that number, 430 of those strikes were from stand-up paddleboarders, and 370 of those strikes were from kayakers. So knowing that some people are renting gear to people, some people are renting B&Bs to people who are using these gears, outreach, reaching out directly and informing people how to maybe properly use these gears so they're not damaging the reef, it seemed like a really great strategy. So I'm actually going to pass it back to Ekolu, who took these numbers and created something called the Ocean Friendly Guide.
All right. That survey was awesome. Imagine 8 days, random days a month, from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, doing this survey for a whole year, sitting on the beach taking notes. It was awesome. And it gave us a great scientific perspective on what's happening beyond the reasonable doubt. So armed with this creel survey, I showed up at the Planning Commission meeting to oppose a short-term rental home permitting process that was happening like across the street from me. Because what I'm noticing was I see the new faces coming in, and I'm seeing the destructive habits that people have because they're unaware of what they're doing. They don't know the place, the currents, the reefs, you know, it's just foreign to them because it's a tropical paradise for them to enjoy as an amenity to where they're staying without being properly taught how to utilize this space. Enter our ocean-friendly guide. So as a result of my intervention within the permitting process, it became evident to the commission that they needed to look at all permits come forward and make every one of those owners responsible for teaching the people that come through how to use that resource, whether it's in the mountain, the ocean, anywhere on Maui, and for that matter, creating a better tourist, a lighter footprint. So we came up with this ocean-friendly guide, and our intent was to just share the information, look at what people were doing, how can we make their habits better, what are they not aware of? So there was an opportunity for us to make some money off of this, but that wasn't why we took this Kuleana on. And I use that word specifically, Kuleana, our responsibility to make a better visitor. And not just visitors, perhaps some of the local people too, sometimes need to be reminded of some of the destructive practices that they may be perpetuating. So this ocean-friendly guide was a way to heal our reefs. So we sent this out to as many organizations as possible with the intent of having them use it in their reservation systems, because it was really link heavy, but it has to be visually pleasing as well, but also inspire them to come up with their own. We came up with a very, very brief Pono Pledge that we did. If you agree to this Pono Pledge, you have accepted that Kuleana to treat our natural resources with respect. And we don't take that lightly, and neither should anybody else. So what we're gonna do from here is we're gonna hit you over to Kika, because an opportunity came up with her, and I thought to myself, it'd be really cool to have something research done so we can get into people's heads and hit them with some messaging. So it was a perfect opportunity that manifested itself into some wonderful results that we want to share with you and hopefully inspire you all to enjoy the numbers and graphs and everything else that's going to be thrown out at you. Thank you, Kika.
Hey, aloha, Ikolo. We got a message in the Q&A from Jenny, and she is directing it to you saying, looking forward to hearing more. We have the same issues resulting from a shift in values here too in Pupukea. So I just wanted to pass that along to you. And mahalo, Ikolu and Alana. So let's turn the presentation over to Kika now to provide some insights from the research. Take it away, Kika.
Aloha, and thank you to Alana and Ikolu for setting the stage so wonderfully and giving really important context for our study. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm coming at you from California. And I'm excited to share our early results of our study investigating perceptions of coral reef health and pro-environmental behavior among coastal users in West Maui. So just to save my internet connection, which has been a little weak, I'm going to stop my video for a minute while we present. So just a little bit about my personal connection to Maui. I was lucky enough to meet Alana, who you just met, about 8 years ago during our master's program at UC Santa Barbara. And we became great friends. And the first opportunity I had, I came to visit her on Maui, where she grew up. And so this is a picture of the two of us at the edge of the Haleakala crater. And through my experiences with her and the community that I met on Maui, I just really, I fell in love, and I found so much peace and support there. And so I knew that when I started my PhD program at Stanford, that I really wanted a part of my research and a part of my dissertation work to contribute to and give back to Maui in the ways that I felt could really help the marine conservation efforts that were underway. So Alana connected me to the organization she works for, the Nature Conservancy, as well as Ikolu and Polanui Hiu. And I learned a bit more about some of the challenges facing West Maui and West Maui's coral reefs. And it was a great combination because I'm really interested in human behavior and what really promotes pro-environmental behavior, behavior that really conserves and protects the environment. And so together we decided to embark on a community engaged research project. And so this is important just to set the foundation for how this is different than a regular academic study, because it takes place in a community and involves community members at every step of the way. So from the design of the research questions to implementing the project, and now through this process of sharing our findings. And community engaged research really is important because it requires a commitment to some type of social action. And that is really essential to me because I wanted to make sure that any research I did wouldn't sit on a shelf, that it would be applied, and it would be useful to people who are out there trying to conserve the natural environment, in particular marine environments, which I'm a big fan of. So with that, also just to sort of reiterate, I think what you all know and what Alana and Kolu discussed, which is that coral reefs in Hawaii are under threat, and they really are under threat globally. There are some drivers that are global drivers, such as rising ocean temperatures, which cause coral bleaching and stress, but also there are a lot of stressors that are local. So things like recreation, in some cases overharvesting and overfishing, and nutrient pollution. And a link really has been made between increasing rates of tourism and development in coastal areas in Hawaii and coral reef decline. And to me, this really indicates the need to understand human behavior. Along with understanding coral reef ecology and biology, we need to understand how humans make decisions in these places, because really we are having the biggest impact. And by changing our behavior, we can potentially really turn things around in some places that are in decline. So again, in partnership with Polanui Hiu and TNC, we developed a set of motivating research questions. So the first thing is, although we may have some assumptions about what people know about corals and conservation, as far as we know, there actually hadn't been a study that tried to really just understand people's baseline knowledge and perception of coral reef health. So what do people know about corals and conservation on Maui? Second, we really want to know what motivates coastal users to behave pro-environmentally in coral reef environments. So what knowledge, perceptions, and social psychological factors are most important in promoting pro-environmental and pro-reef behaviors? And finally, I think especially for Polanui Hiu and TNC, we wanted to know the differences between residents and visitors. So really, what are the differences between residents and visitors' knowledge, perceptions, and behaviors? So before I go a little further, I just want to pause and ensure we're on the same page with this term pro-environmental behavior. So this is a kind of an academic term, but it's pretty straightforward. It means individual and collective actions that benefit the environment. And so this could be applied to lots of settings. A pro-environmental behavior could be something like recycling. But in this context, we really are talking about behaviors that could protect and conserve a coral reef environment. So our study area was from, you can see on this map here, it was from Odawalu to Kika Point, otherwise known as Black Rock. And this area, as Alana and Ikolu introduced, really is an area of concern due to low fish abundance, poor water quality, and high levels of recreation. So it really is an area where there are a lot of people in the water doing a lot of different things. Visitors and tourists who are taking surf lessons and paddleboarding, people who are out fishing, locals who are surfing. So it's a busy area, and it really is highly used, and the ocean is interacting with humans quite a bit. And it's also under consideration for potentially additional marine management, such as the state-sponsored fisheries management area. And so I really see our study as having two objectives. The first is to provide the community partners, Polanui Hiu and TNC, with insight into the differences between coastal user groups. And this could be used to design and leverage education and outreach materials, and potentially demonstrate support for increased management, and potentially in the future, help us design interventions to promote pro-environmental behavior in West Maui. And sort of from my side of things, from the academic side of things, I'm really interested in these general drivers of pro-environmental behavior among coastal users. And this can help us understand and contribute to our scholarly understanding of pro-environmental behavior. So there are scholars all over the world looking at what promotes pro-environmental behavior in, say, urban environments, in other coastal places. And so there's the potential for this study to contribute to our general understanding of this and potentially inform policy and education in other places. So we decided to conduct a survey to investigate these questions. And before writing the survey, we really needed to kind of organize our thoughts and think about what were some of the most important topics that we wanted to ask in the survey. The things that we thought were the most important to help us understand why an individual person would behave pro-environmentally. So I'm going to go through these one by one, but this conceptual framework includes knowledge and perceptions of coral reef health, management, and threats, an individual's residence type, so whether a resident or a visitor, their demographics and the activities they engage in, and this idea of Kuleana, which Ekolu introduced earlier, and I will speak a little bit more about, which is also sort of a sense of responsibility. So these were some of the most important things that we wanted to ask people about in the survey to help us understand pro-environmental behavior. And just to say, the survey had a lot of questions, so this wasn't everything, but just wanted to give you a snapshot today of just a few of these topics. So what knowledge and perceptions are important?
Kika, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask, do you know how many people had signed the Pono Pledge at the time of your study?
Yes, so the Pono Pledge was one of the behaviors that we asked about, and we found that 251 people of the 299 people who took the survey did take the pledge. And I can talk about that a little bit more too later.
Great. Hey, I also just wanted to interject because we've had some late people joining in. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the social and psychological factors that influence human behavior in our nearshore environments, and currently sharing some really interesting data is Kika Santana. So please continue, Kika. Thank you.
Thank you. So we asked people about their knowledge and perceptions, and we asked people specifically about their knowledge of coral reefs and current management and conservation efforts on Maui, as well as their perceptions of coral reef and reef fish health, their perceptions of the impacts of recreation and fishing on corals, and their perceptions of coastal water quality. Also in the survey, we asked people where they lived, and in order to simplify this and really categorize people as a resident or a visitor, we did collapse full-time residents and part-time residents as residents, and first-time visitors, frequent visitors, and former residents as visitors. So those were our two groups. And also we asked people about Kuleana, and as Ekolu introduced, to my understanding, Kuleana is a uniquely Hawaiian value, which is translated loosely to a sense of responsibility, a privilege, and really this reciprocal relationship between the person responsible and the thing they're responsible for. So for example, Hawaiians have a Kuleana to the land to care for it and respect it. And in return, the land feeds and provides shelter and really so much more for Hawaiians. So it is this relationship of reciprocity and balance between humans and the natural environment. And finally, we asked people about their behaviors. And so we asked people about both their personal actions and community level actions. The types of personal actions we were interested in were things like packing out trash, reducing plastic use, not touching coral, and wearing reef-safe sunscreen. Examples of community level actions are things like sharing information about reefs with friends and family, donating to conservation organizations, volunteering, or participating in education and outreach. And finally, we asked people to take a look at the Pono Pledge, and they had the opportunity to select any of the statements on the pledge. So for example, one of the statements was, "I will reduce the waste I generate, especially from plastic." Another is, "I will not trespass, venture beyond safely, or expose sensitive areas." So people were allowed to select any of these statements within the pledge. And then on the next page in the survey, they signed their name. And that really sort of represented a contract and an opportunity for them to make a promise to conduct themselves with care and respect for Maui's environment. So again, just really quickly, these are the main topics in our framework for developing the survey questions. Included knowledge and perceptions of coral reef health, management, and threats, residence type, demographics and activities, this idea of Kuleana or sense of responsibility, and a variety of personal, community level actions, and the Pono Pledge. So Darla, did we want to take another pause for any other questions that might have popped up?
We don't have any questions coming in right now, but it would be a really good time to remind people that we do have the Q&A feature active. And if you're on Facebook, we have somebody monitoring Facebook. So if you have questions or any of our panelists, you can put them in Facebook, or if you're on the Zoom webinar, you can enter them in Zoom.
Great. Well, I will continue on. So I've given you all sort of an introduction to all of the development of the survey. So how we thought about our research questions, what information we wanted to know. And now, I want to talk a little bit about how we actually did the survey. So we had to get out there and actually talk to people. So our survey was conducted in October and November of last year, 2019. And we went out from Oluwalu to Black Rock in 9 different sites. And we went out over the course of several weeks and would sample, we tried to at least, invite every 3rd or 5th person encountered on the beach, depending on how busy the beach was. So this was an attempt to get as random of a sample as possible. So we tried not to survey multiple people within the same family, for example. But it's tough to get a random sample when you're out on the beach because sometimes people are coming in and out of the water. So we did our best. And ultimately, we were able to survey 299 residents and visitors who were out there enjoying the reef and the water in West Maui. And the survey was entirely anonymous and confidential. It took an average of 25 minutes, which is quite a long survey, but we were able to provide people a small gift card incentive in gratitude for participating. So the first set of results that I want to talk about really are our findings related to the differences in knowledge and perceptions of residents and visitors. So the first finding is that we found residents were more knowledgeable about coral reefs in West Maui. And this is a bar plot, and it shows the differences in the average response of a resident compared to the average response of a visitor. So just to direct your attention, if you're able to see the webinar, to the horizontal dark black line. So that is the mean or the average response. So if you look at residents, you can see that that black line is between a 2 and a 3, a little closer to a 3. And that translates to a resident indicating on average that they are between slightly knowledgeable and moderately knowledgeable about coral reefs. Whereas the visitor, you can see their mean or average response is about 1.5. And that's between not at all knowledgeable and slightly knowledgeable. So we found a statistically significant difference in the average response between residents and visitors related to their knowledge of coral reefs. We also found that visitors perceived coral reefs to be healthier. So in this case, visitors responded that they thought coral reefs were at about fair health, and residents responded closer to between poor health and fair health. So this also is a significant difference. We also found that residents were more concerned about coral reefs in West Maui. And this is a pretty striking difference. The average resident said that they were very concerned, whereas the average visitor said that they were moderately concerned. And finally, visitors perceive the water quality to be better. And so here you can see that the average resident response indicated they thought the water quality in West Maui was moderately clean, and visitors responded they thought it was very clean. So these are some pretty interesting findings, because it may be actually kind of confirming things we already knew, but it really is evidence to show that there are significant differences in what both residents and visitors know and what they perceive as it relates to coral reef health and water quality. And this really demonstrates an opportunity for Polanui Hiu and TNC and other conservation organizations to potentially target these two groups in different ways, because yeah, they do have a different baseline sense of how well the coral reefs are doing and how clean the water is. The next set of findings is I'm going to talk about a few factors that we found were associated with pro-environmental behavior. So if you remember, we asked people about personal actions. And these were things like packing out trash, reducing plastic use, not touching coral, wearing reef-safe sunscreen. And we found a few factors that were positively associated with a commitment to take these personal actions in the future. So the first is being female. We found that that was positively associated with committing to taking personal actions in the future. Also, people who indicated that they were swimmers, also positively associated with a commitment to future personal actions. And this idea of Kuleana. So people who ranked higher in levels of Kuleana were positively associated with commitment to take personal actions. We also found a few factors that were negatively associated with a commitment to take personal actions. The first being a visitor. So if someone was a visitor, they were less likely specifically to say that they were willing to pack out trash. Also, if people perceived the health of the reef on average to be higher, they were less likely to commit to packing out trash and wearing reef-safe sunscreen. And finally, we found that people who engaged in fishing, gathering and harvesting and marine resources, and boating were all less likely to commit to personal actions in the future. Now moving on to the community level actions. So again, we found a few positive associations between knowledge. So people who had higher levels of knowledge were more likely to commit to community level actions. And so these are things like sharing information about reefs, donating to conservation organizations, volunteering, and conducting education and outreach. We also interestingly found that people who engaged in canoeing and kayaking, surfing, and monitoring wildlife, that those features were all positively associated with a willingness to take community level actions. And also Kuleana again. So this is really an important feature that we're seeing again is associated with the willingness to take pro-environmental actions. There were also a few negative associations. Interestingly, we found that people who had higher levels of income and education were negatively associated with a willingness to take community level actions, and also being a visitor. For all of the community level actions, if someone was a visitor, they were less likely to commit to these types of actions. And finally, perceptions of clean water and perceptions of coral reef health, which these sort of make sense, right? So if someone perceives the water to be cleaner and perceives the reefs to be healthier, they had less of a commitment to take community level action. So maybe they didn't think it was necessary.
Can I ask a quick question? So I'm just looking at the types of people that positively associate with taking community action. And I know this surveying was all done on the beach. Do you think that we could probably assume that scuba divers would be in that same group? You know, these are, you know, water sports type people that are concerned about the environment.
So that's a really good question. So we actually did ask about a variety of different activities, and scuba and diving was one of them. So people had the opportunity to check if they did any of a whole list of activities. And we actually didn't find any significant association between diving or engaging in scuba and commitment to community level actions. And so that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. There may well be some type of association, and we just didn't capture it in our sample. But yeah, so I think it's a good question though, and I think that we are interested in sort of future analysis looking at the types of activities that people do together. So there may be a group of individuals, as you said, who are maybe water sports people, and then maybe there are a group of people who mostly sunbathe and relax on the beach. And so we want to sort of see what the bundle of activities are that most people do together. Wonderful. So the final thing that I wanted to just mention is we did find a few factors that were associated with people taking the Pono Pledge. So again, we found that being female led to a positive association between taking the pledge. So women were more likely to take the pledge. Also, people who perceived the overall level of threat to West Maui's coral reefs were also more likely to take the pledge. And kind of again mirroring the personal actions, we found that people who said that they engaged in fishing, gathering or harvesting of marine resources, and boating, that was all negatively associated with taking the pledge. But I think why we didn't find a lot of things associated with this is that most people took the pledge. So as I mentioned earlier, 251 people of 299 survey responses did sign the pledge. That's 84% of our respondents. So we can't find a lot of variation when most people took the pledge. But I do think that that's it's a hopeful sign that regardless of sort of the variations of what people do, what they know, and what they perceive, that many people did take the opportunity to pledge and promise to conduct themselves in ways that were respectful and pro-environmental in the reef. So our next steps are to do sort of the next level of statistical analysis on a lot of this data, which is called regression analysis. And what this can help us understand is what are the most important predictors. So we found these associations, but they're all sort of at different levels. Some of them are fairly weak, they're significant, but we want to find the most important predictors for personal actions, community level actions, and taking the Pono Pledge. And once we do that analysis, we should be able to say more concretely what are some of the most important drivers, both related to perceptions, knowledge, and social psychological factors that really predict pro-environmental behavior. And also I will be presenting some of these next set of findings at the Hawaii Conservation Conference at the end of August. So if anyone here who's listening or watching has the opportunity to be there, we will be presenting on September 3rd. So now I'd like to pass it back to Alana and Ekolu to get their kind of community perspective on our findings and our next steps.
Hey guys, we did have a couple of questions that came in too that were directly related to what you were talking about. If you wouldn't mind a couple of questions. Kelly King was asking, did you differentiate between divers who fished and those who just viewed the reef and sea life? I think that was kind of coming off the question that I asked. You said that you did ask if diving was one of the activities they participated in. And I guess she's trying to make a distinction between people that dive for fishing and people that dive, recreationally.
Right. So I think in the survey, someone would have been able to answer that they both fished and that they were a diver, but there wasn't a lot of specificity in the diving sort of selection. So I think that it would be difficult from our survey to know the difference between someone who's diving to fish versus diving to observe the marine life.
Okay, and then we had an anonymous attendee that asked, were visitors/residents interested in having more information to be educated on the health of the reef system?
So thinking about this, we didn't ask anyone specifically in the survey if they wanted more information or were interested in participating in a specific event. But we did offer the opportunity for people to provide their email address. And so would you like to provide your email address? We can interact with you in the future, potentially provide more information for you in the future. And in particular, find out the findings from this study, which we do plan on actually sharing with the participants that shared their email address. So I think that's a good proxy measure for interest in further information.
Okay. Final question for this area from Megan Waters, also interesting. Am I correct? The level of knowledge in the survey is based on respondent assessment of their knowledge, not based on responses to questions evaluating their knowledge levels?
It's a good question. So what I presented today, so the levels of knowledge were based on 3 questions in the survey that were self-reported or self-assessments of knowledge. So we asked people what they perceived their overall knowledge to be, what they perceived their knowledge about conservation and management strategies, and their knowledge about personal actions that they could take to protect the reef. And so those 3 measures were combined. We did also ask people to rate their perceived health of 3 photographs of a coral. So there was a coral that was bleached, a coral that was dead, and a coral that was alive and healthy. And so we asked people to assess the health of those particular photographs. And unfortunately, I don't have that to share, but we didn't find a lot of significant differences. So it looks like most people who took our survey were able to identify which corals were alive and which were dead. So besides the photographs, we didn't ask any other questions that would sort of objectively assess someone's knowledge.
Okay. I did want to remind people too, if you have Q&A for any of the panelists, to please enter your questions in the Q&A and not the chat, because I'm actually not monitoring the chat. So I pulled one question out of there, but just try and use that Q&A feature. So yeah, let's turn it back over to Alana and Ikolu. You have some comments to wrap up?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Kika, for presenting all of the findings. I know that I'm really excited about so much of the findings being significant, and that this is a snapshot of a 25-minute survey. I'm excited to see what more will come from further analysis. My biggest takeaway is feeling really heartened to hear how many people took the Pono Pledge, whether they were a resident or a visitor. From a management perspective, I find this really helpful to know that given an opportunity and the right information, that the majority of people are willing to conduct themselves in a way that is respectful to the ocean and Hawaii communities. So I think we all benefit from knowing that most people are coming to the table willing to help out and do what is right, do what is Pono. I'm also really curious as a next step in understanding what the drivers or barriers are for people who are less likely to conduct themselves in not a pro-environmentally behavior way. And then we can focus our management efforts in those areas. On a personal note, I really love how the survey captured the cultural value of Kuleana and how it seems to translate tangibly to people's willingness to take individual and community efforts. Kuleana is something that definitely drives and motivates my involvement in conservation work in Hawaii. So I'm really grateful that that was captured in this survey.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my...
Alana, I just wanted to add to that because we did have actually a comment come in on the Q&A from Sherry Curry, and you know, it's regarding seeing a negative action on the beach. And I know the purpose of this today is not to, you know, discuss solutions and what we should do for every situation, but I do hope that out of this research, that is one of the outcomes, that people have better tools to, you know, proactively deal with. In this case, it was observing a turtle harassment. And I know so many of us struggle with, you know, whether it's cigarette butts on the beach or, you know, whatever the issue is, you know, how do we positively respond and change that behavior? So gosh, you guys are just have pulled together amazing data for that type of work.
Thanks, Darla, and thanks for the sharing of that story. One thing that isn't really recorded in the data sharing was people's responses after they took the survey. And I was surprised at how many people said, thank you. I learned something from taking this. So that was really exciting that it unintentionally also became an education tool.
Right. Ikolu, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Just waiting for my time.
Okay.
First, I just got to say thank you very much to Alana and Kika and the team behind them. Having these two, working with these two young women is just awesome. Everyone's got to have an Alana and Kika on their team to get things done, especially with Kika and the numbers and graphs that you got to look to. I don't think you guys can understand the complexity of regression analysis and correlations and all that stuff that the normal person on the beach would have a hard time to understand. But to make it, to interpret that and sharpen that tool to become a management tool to effectively manage our nearshore systems, not just the biology side, but the cultural perspective is super important. So where do we go from here? Well, given what's happened with the whole COVID thing that turned our world upside down, everyone's seen nature take a respite. Everyone that I've talked to anyway have seen more fish come back, more stuff happening. Either maybe they're just more aware of it because they're spending more time on the beach, or it's happening. So we're having a hard time actually collecting that data, which is basically anecdotal evidence to make it real yet. But the tools that we are given with this survey will help to manage our perspectives with people's perspectives and trying to change them and create a new social norm. When I say creating a new social norm is how do we behave properly in the ocean? We've done it before with seatbelts. We're currently doing it now with masks. Let's create a whole new social norm with everybody on listening to this, and do your little part. Accept that Kuleana. You sat through this, you listened to us, you understand what's happening. Accept that Kuleana and take it a little bit further. Create better people that live in this world so they can do good things. Not just for what we're doing here in West Maui, but for any of the other groups that need the support to help each other. And I think collectively we can make a huge difference. And this is not just aimed at tourists, but we do want to change their perspectives. You know, it's not just a rock in the ocean. It's a living coral reef. It is the foundation of life, according to our Kumulipo, our Hawaiian creation chant. Line number 15, came forth the coral polyp. That's how important this is, right? So it's important that we change people's perspectives and make them understand that, or just share with them. And whenever we come up with these challenging situations that you alluded to earlier, it's because there's a lack of knowledge. But if we share this knowledge, I think we minimize the bad behavior. And by doing that, we can create a better world today, but more importantly, not just for tomorrow, but I'm thinking beyond that. The people that are not yet born, that's what's important to me personally. So I have accepted this Kuleana, and I take this to heart. And I thank each and every one of you for being out here and listening to this and trying to make a difference in your own communities. But start with yourself, your families, your friends, and then you branch out. That's kind of how that Kuleana works. Once you accept it, it's got to be internal. I want to leave you with this. No little no'eau that I love. Ikawama mua kawama hope. Say them one more time. Ikawama mua kawama hope. The future can be found in the wisdom of the past. We are not creating anything new. This is something that's been done before. We're just trying to get back there. So in the Hawaiian lens and perspective, we are not looking forward, but we're looking back, because our kupuna have the answers. They have shared it with us. Have we been quick enough to accept that Kuleana and that ike, that knowledge that's been passed down, so that we can move forward? Not creating anything new. I mean, once in a while, you got to make sure you know where you're going. But if you look behind, the answer's all there. So I want to thank everybody for being here and accepting that Kuleana, so we can all make a difference in this world. Mahalo.
Hey, Ikolu, there was one question that was directed at towards you.
Uh-oh.
Do you want to comment on your thoughts on the concept of an impact fee? And I'm assuming that the question is regarding tourists. Do you have a thought on that?
An impact fee. I'm assuming, and this has gone around in many of the different meetings I've attended as of late, is impact fee, like a green fee or something. As tourists come in, they pay some money down, and that money goes directly to some type of management or to enforcement.
Conservation.
Yeah, Department of Conservation and Resource Enforcement. But as it currently stands, I believe, and I can't quote the correct laws, we cannot do that at this point. It would take a legislative action, a federal action. So we're talking Washington, D.C. level, to make some changes in the laws in order for states to start charging those fees. So it's a great idea. Other countries have done it. Why can't we? Are we behind the times? Maybe we need to look at what we're doing. Time to vote, get the right people in there. Yeah. So yeah, I love that idea. It just, unfortunately, it just doesn't work in the current government setup that we have.
Okay. Well, if anyone has any further questions, we're going to give you information how to contact Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. And I believe now we are wrapping up. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining and participating. And if we could see if I've got the correct slide up for what's coming up oh, there we go. There's the slide. So please join us on Wednesday, September 9th at 5:30 for another great Maui Nui Marine Resource Council webinar on sea turtles with guests Cameron Allen and Chandel Brunson from NOAA. And please note that this is the second Wednesday of the month, not the normal schedule, because we know many of you would like to attend the Conservation Conference, which is taking place on the first Wednesday. So to receive free information about this and future events, please visit mauireefs.org and sign up for the Reef in Brief e-newsletter, which is great, or follow M&MRC on Facebook. Next slide. And special thanks to our presenters, Kika Santana, Alana Yurkanin, and Ikolu Lindsay. Mahalo to the County of Maui Office of Economic Development for supporting Know Your Ocean virtual monthly speaker series. You'll be able to view this webinar on Facebook, Akaku Community Media, and listen to it on the radio on Koni 104.7, K-Rock 97.3, KRYL Country 106.5, and Retro 102.1 on Maui, Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Next slide. Maui Nui Marine Resource Council works for healthy coral reefs, clean ocean water, and abundant native fish for the islands of Maui County. Learn more at mauireefs.org. And that is it. So we just wanted to all say aloha. We can do our waves goodbye, and please join us again next month.
Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo.
Take care, everyone.